the less time you spend worrying about that fancy stuff, the less time you spend looking at something other than your athletes.
Welcome back. My name is James Grigson. I'm joined here by Ben Brugman. We're using the power of Zoom to get to you today. Obviously, everything being remote at the moment. We've gone to Zoom. I've been a bit pretentious, and I've always wanted to be face to face with people. But times have changed, and we're going to have to go remote. So hopefully, I'll be able to churn out a few more of these in an online manner. But Ben, just wanted to welcome you on and thank you for coming on and joining us.
Thanks, mate. Pleasure.
So we wanted to go through your journey, and what strikes me the most about your journey is your international travels, international and domestic travels. So, basically from studying in Queensland to a gig in Adelaide, you've gone to Perth, you've travelled over New Zealand, spent a stint there. There's a lot that has happened in a relatively short period of time. And I think it's within the industry, being able to travel, having the ability to travel is important because opportunities are scarce in the local community. So I really wanted to dive into that. So the story is, as I've seen it, is that you studied out of Brisbane, and then your first gigs were in and around Brisbane with Acceleration, but your first main gig appears to be down in Adelaide with the 36ers. Is that right? And if so, tell me the story about that. How did that come about?
Yeah. So I guess Acceleration came like anyone else. You're going through your uni and you're going through your internship. Went through there. Lucky enough to gain a job out of the internship that I did there, and had a few good years there. I can't remember exactly how many, but that was excellent for me as far as developing as a coach and just getting in and doing a heap of coaching. And then from there, they've got a really sort of solid connection with basketball, being based out of basketball stadiums and having worked prior to me with Brisbane Bullets in their first stint and with Gold Coast Blaze when they were around. So that connection sort of through the company and through Stuart Briggs, who owns the company, just put me in a position where the opportunity in Adelaide came about. And yeah, I think sort of that came up, it got thrown at me, and I sort of at the time went, these don't come around every day, so I better go do it. And next thing I know, I was in Adelaide.
How did you have that in your mind? So you mentioned Stuart Briggs there at Acceleration. Was he the person to almost enforce in you that these opportunities don't come around often? Where did that mindset stem from? Was it him? Was it your analysis of the industry as you saw it at the time? What was the catalyst? Because not everyone chooses to move interstate. I know plenty of people that don't look for opportunities outside of Brisbane, for example. They're only looking inside of Brisbane. So where did this mindset come from?
It was very much in me. I think I know of other people who've worked at Acceleration as well and had similar opportunities to what I have, and they've gone the other way with it, where it would have meant moving away. And I've even had conversations with them where they were making the decision, and I just said, look, it's up to you to do what you want to do with it. Obviously I've got my own biases having done it myself, and they went the other way on it. But for me, I just looked at it and went, I'd been there. I think I'd been there 4 years or something at the time. I'd never even heard of such an opportunity coming around. So it wasn't anything Stewie said. It was just me looking at what had gone on around me and going, oh, that's probably a good challenge. That's something I want to do. Let's go.
And for the younger people and young strength coaches watching, what is that experience like? So, you obviously you're speaking to these people remotely. You get the opportunity. It starts, obviously the assumption is you start to pack your bags and head. But, talk us through the first few weeks in the new town, having to acclimatise to leaving, your family and people and friends that you know, and then having to get right in the thick of it and begin coaching in this environment. Talk us through those first couple of weeks in Adelaide.
Yeah, I guess even if I go back before that, I guess first things first, make sure you've got a really understanding and supportive partner. I am still with my girlfriend of the time. Somehow, she's been dragged to all of those places you listed earlier, and she's kept me around somehow. I think we'd only been together coming up to 6 months at the time when I decided to go to Adelaide, and it's now been seven and a bit years. So that was probably the first hurdle, telling her, look, this is what's come up and this is what I want to do. And that's worked out, thank God. But yeah, I think family was an easy one for me. I'm an only child. Mum and dad are both super supportive, and I knew that if it all fell apart, they'd support me and help me out. So I sort of had a pretty nice little safety net to go and do it, as far as support from everyone who was important to me. So that was good. And then I guess, getting there I actually had a really good time. I took, I think, 2 weeks in between finishing at Acceleration and starting in Adelaide. I took the scenic route. I went Sydney to Canberra to Melbourne to Adelaide and spent 2 nights in each of those places, just visiting friends who'd moved from Brisbane to those places. So it was almost like I got to do a little taste test of what living away from Brisbane is like, because I got to see what those people were doing. And I treated it like a little holiday to visit mates and surf along the way. So it wasn't a disaster in that sense. That was a nice sort of soft landing to start it off.
Yeah.
Rolled into Adelaide. I'll never forget rolling into Adelaide, parking outside the house I was moving into. It was pouring rain. I was trying to move my entire life out of the back of my car and into this house while everything I owned was getting bucketed down on with rain. So that was, and that was probably a good introduction to Adelaide and its weather. So, but yeah, from there, like I was just excited. Hey, like I really went into it with the sort of, I guess, the thought of, I don't know anyone in Adelaide. I'm not going here for a social call. I'm going here for this amazing opportunity that's been put in front of me, and I'm just going to make sure I give that everything I've got. Because I had nothing in Adelaide to distract me from that. So that was cool. I just went in, dug into that, and did the best I could with it. I look back on it now and cringe because some of the stuff I did was absolutely terrible. But at the time I was giving it everything I had, and I got to go out on my own, make those mistakes, and learn from them.
Firstly, you need to tell me probably offline some of the tricks and tips for convincing the missus to be able to follow you over here, mate. She's there's me and there's others on probably watching on that need to know some of the tips that you've done. But nevertheless, what seems to be quite evident in that story is your love and passion for the industry and the business, and understanding that, okay, I'll get into this new town. I've got nothing. I've got no distractions, and I've just got this one job to do. And because you loved it, it seems as if that was a very easy motivating factor for you. Would you recommend traveling interstate to people that are having second guesses about the industry? Because it seems like you have to be 100% committed.
Yeah, I guess it's a good sort of heat check as far as going, is this seriously what I don't want to do as an occupation? Because if you're going to somewhere that's, you've got none of that support around you, and you got to sort of spend some time on your own and just be immersed in it pretty much, it sorts you out pretty quickly as to whether that's whether you're really actually excited about it or whether you just like the idea of it.
And it seems that you mentioned some of the mistakes that you made when you got to Adelaide. You would have had some years at coaching at Acceleration and some internships around Brisbane. But was Adelaide the first experience where this was your own program? And it seems that was the case. And from there, obviously, there's a lot of mistakes along the way. Is there any kind of key learnings that came out of those mistakes from your first stint in Adelaide?
Yeah, I guess for anyone who knows Acceleration knows it's really heavily systemised sort of operation. They've got some really solid systems and procedures that they use that work really well there. And I guess for me, this was my first chance to step outside those, and I definitely didn't reinvent the wheel overnight going there, but it just gave me a chance to put my own spin on a few things that, to be honest, a lot of the time it wasn't because I thought it was better or anything like that. It was just because I want to try this and see how it goes. As far as specifics, I can't remember exactly like anything I did. I just remember some of the stuff. Like I go back to it now and I just go, oh, whatever that was that I was doing, it clearly wasn't like, if I had my time again now, I'd do it far differently. And I think I was a typical young coach at the time, just trying to do too much, be too fancy, and the stuff I do now is a hell of a lot simpler. So it's primarily that sort of stuff where I was trying to do the big fancy stuff, and now I just probably go and have a chat with an athlete and find a much simpler solution to it.
And where along your journey did you learn to do that? Because I feel like from the coaches that I watch, and the trajectory that you kind of see them go along is like, to your point, it's too much, it's too fancy initially, and then it becomes a hell of a lot simpler. But then in some ways they seem to be able to engage your athletes more with the simple stuff, if that makes sense. So, along the journey, they're simplifying their programs, but their skill level, in terms of athlete engagement and being able to resonate with an athlete, communicate with an athlete, get their message across to who they're coaching, seems to go up tenfold. So you get this switch of simple coaching but engaged athlete versus maybe the really fancy stuff with a semi-engaged athlete who's just happy with what they're doing at the time, but maybe not necessarily so as engaged as the athletes that they may be dealing with as they get older and more experienced. Would you say that you've gone through a similar switch, and how did that necessarily happen?
Yeah, 100% spot on. I guess to your point, like the less time you spend worrying about that fancy stuff, the less time you spend looking at something other than your athletes. I guess the less time I spend looking at this computer and the more time I spend looking face to face or Zoom to Zoom with the player, the simpler my approach tends to get, but I think you get more return on investment in that regard. I hate using that phrase when you're talking about an athlete, but I guess it hits the nail on the head as far as what you're doing. For me, it was a gradual transition. I think a big sort of a hot patch in that transition was definitely the next move when I went over to Perth and started working with the Western Force and their academy. I guess this sort of just continues that journey part of what we're talking about here. But 2 seasons down in Adelaide, I had the opportunity to head over and work under Will Markwick, who was the head S&C for the Force at the time, and had also previously been in acceleration. Will's a guy, he's a bit of a pace setter for the coaches around him. He's always asking really critical questions and just pushing the envelope on things. I think so that was an appealing move as far as getting to go over and work alongside him day to day, because he ran, he was one of the guys whilst I was at Acceleration who ran the franchise that was on the Gold Coast. I was based out of Brisbane, and I made a point when I was at early days at Acceleration of getting down to Gold Coast and trying to do some work there, just to be around him and see how he operated. So yeah, just that opportunity to get over to Perth, work with him day to day was one I just jumped at. And yeah, that simplifying is probably, I owe a lot of that to him, where he just pushed, like, I guess getting over there was the first time I'd been exposed to things like GPS and stuff like that. And, like any young coach, I probably went down that rabbit hole a fair bit early on. And he not so eloquently pulled me out of that and just said, go talk to that player because that's your job. But that had a big impact and was pretty important for me.
So what is that mistake when you say technology? Talk me through that, because I in my experience, I only really got to the mistakes of basic or too fancy programming. I had a couple of stints with some, with schools and rugby league clubs in Brisbane. So I was only in the programming element and saw the mistakes that I was doing, and then heard people talk about the mistakes later on. Obviously, I'm out of coaching at the moment. What are the mistakes that people make inside of tech and the young coaches inside of tech?
I think the big one is just thinking that every problem can be recognised and solved by looking at the numbers or by looking at whatever this tech's spitting out for you, rather than, using that to answer a question that has come through a human interaction. I think having those interactions and those questions being raised as a result of chats with coaches, chats with players, and chats with your co-workers are, that's the starting point. And then the tech just helps you answer those questions rather than the tech sort of leading you on your day-to-day work, and then you using those conversations to back up the tech. It's definitely the former and not the latter.
Yeah, and working in tech, it's you've hit the nail on the head, mate. Like the best people that we see utilize our tech is the ones that use it for information and don't use it as the be all and end all. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. It seems like when you move to Western Force, aside from those little rabbit holes inside of using new technology like GPS, Will was very much a mentor that, like you said, got you to critically analyze your coaching. Is that the beginning of when you began to go, okay, it's more about, really got to understand this athlete and not so much be fancy with the programming?
Yeah, definitely. I think, you going to a place like that, the access to resources and things like that, almost doubled for me straight away. And I had no clue how to use them. So I think there was definitely a learning curve in just learning how to use the tools that you've got at your hands. But then it's being able to recognise sort of a point of diminishing returns there as far as the time you're spending on those tools. And obviously I went past that point and probably flogged a dead horse there, so to speak. And he was really helpful to just pull me back and go, okay, but what did the athletes say about it, or what did we do there? Did that help? A lot of the time, just did that help as far as like what impact has it had on your program or what you're doing? That was one where you go, oh yeah, no, actually I just looked at a heap of numbers and it didn't actually help. So
no, that's great. And you, I think the next big move was actually to New Zealand. Correct me if I'm wrong. How did that all come about?
Yeah, so I guess goes through the whole time in Perth. Early days came in to sort of like a 50-50 rehab with the Force and working their academy. The following year, through Rugby Australia, essentially taking over the Force, my role became entirely academy, and I was lucky in that role. The Force and Perth and Rugby WA is set up a little bit differently to some others, where they had a group of athletes within their academy. It was about 10 to 15, depending on the year, who were full-time, essentially full-time professional athletes at the age of between 18 and 21. And they'd come in every day and train, and then they'd go out on Tuesday, Thursday night, train with their clubs and play club footy on the weekend. And it was essentially building them up towards either appearing in what's still the NRC or appearing in the Under-19 championships at the end of the year, looking towards Australian 20s representation. So I guess that was my primary focus with that program. And then I had everything else underneath that, as far as under 18s, under 16s, under 15s.
So were you looking after that whole academy program?
Yeah, so I guess primary coaching focus with that full-time group, and then more of a coaching the coaches with interns type focus at the other levels, but still pretty hands-on in those ones. Like I would lead the majority of those sessions with the other underage groups, but definitely gave more rope to the other coaches, the intern coaches that were working with me in those programs, to give them experience. And that was part of that role that I really enjoyed, sort of helping some of those guys. And there's a lot of, I was just chatting to one of them yesterday, because he came in as a first year uni student. He's now just about to finish his undergrad, and he was just talking to me about, what the hell do I do after this? So I really enjoyed like helping those coaches out and chatting to some of them now. I was back in Perth recently for an AFLW game, and I caught up with 3 of them. Yeah, that was a really cool part of that job. But I guess from there, being rugby in WA is obviously not, it's a fair way down the pecking order as far as the sports that WA kids will go and play. And as a fact, and then obviously from a rugby perspective, you've got Queensland, you've got New South Wales, you've got ACT, and then Victoria, WA, sort of very much the poorer cousins there, as far as I guess the number of the pure bulk of players that are being identified for representative squads. So I guess, and this is where my own, I think I mentioned to you like before we started this, that I have a bit of an internal dialogue around my decisions to move and my decisions to go to different roles.
Yeah.
One thing that sticks in my head around like leaving roles and going to new roles is words of a guy called Ron McKeefrey, who's a strength coach from over in the US, and talks about making the big time where you are. Whether that's his quote or not, I don't know. Everyone's stolen something from somebody. But I always sort of think about that and go, okay, what more can I get out of where I am right now? But then again, thinking about sort of that principle of diminishing returns and what that looks like from a career development and your development as a coach perspective, and going, okay, well, is where I currently am reaching a point of diminishing returns as far as the challenge it's giving me, the accountability that I'm held to, and all those sorts of things. So
I can already sense you'd be losing your voice from the conversations you'd be having with yourself, just from those 2 points alone. I see what you mean now.
So I toss that around in my head a lot, and I don't have an answer. I just, at the end of the day, I just comes down to gut feel a little bit. So yeah, got to that point where I felt like within WA, I guess because of what I was talking about there, the number of players that tend to be produced out of there, the things I was doing probably just weren't being stress tested to the level that I would have liked them to have been. Like I'd put some things in place, some systems and processes, and I was trying to do things better from a coaching perspective. And I just wasn't being pushed the way I would have liked to have been. And I'm self-aware enough to know that I need to be pushed. I probably just don't go and do that myself to the extent that I would like to. And I need to be held accountable when stuff isn't being done the way it should be. So I just started looking for opportunities where I thought that had happened, and where I could go and put in place some of the stuff that I was already doing that I thought was good, but just have it stress tested to a larger extent. And that's where New Zealand came up. So that's a long-winded version of I guess the thought process behind that move.
Yeah, and obviously you would have had to convince the missus again to to move not only across Australia, but then again, and then over the ditch to New Zealand. That's probably
the most interesting one of the bunch.
If you care to share, I'd love to know.
We just had it. We had it pretty good in Perth. Like both our roles that we were working in, she loved her job there, and mine was, like, for all I've just said about it, it was great for me. In terms of, I probably developed the most there out of any of the roles I've had. We had a good little sort of friendship circle in Perth. We had, great beaches at our doorstep. We had Margaret River 3 hours down the road, that's still the retirement plan. That place is unreal.
Yep.
So it was a really good setup, and we still, I reckon, weekly look at each other and go, why did we ever leave? So that's probably been the most interesting of the moves that we've made.
Mate, I lived it. I grew up in Perth, and I still got heaps of family over there. It's a top spot. So you were looking after the programs at the Western Force and seemingly taking a bit more of a leadership position. Was there any leadership elements inside of the program that you're looking after in Palmerston North? What was the lure? So you kind of mentioned some of the motivating factors. I can see already that, obviously being stress tested by a different environment and even a different culture. Obviously, New Zealand rugby is renowned for their culture. Was there anyone in particular or anything in particular that led to your move to New Zealand? Like Will was a motivating factor for the move to Perth?
So this one was entirely just that stress testing side of things. So,
Yeah.
I guess how to put it, I sat down I was lucky enough that after applying for it, one of the academy manager from Manawatu Rugby, which is where I ended up, happened to actually be in Perth visiting relatives. So we caught up, and this is before they'd even shortlisted. We caught up and just had a chat. He was sort of talking to me about where they were trying to take things and what they were trying to do. And a lot of it was the kind of work that I'd been doing, going back to, I guess, that data side of stuff and applying it in a coaching context. And I guess for me, I'd been doing that with my little group of 10 to 15 full-time athletes, and then scaled back versions of through the underage programs. And where they were taking their program over there, basically put me in a position to look to apply similar principles and similar systems, but just with a larger volume of players in an environment that had week-to-week results associated with it, as opposed to just long-term development of young players. So the feedback you get and the pressure that gets put on those systems is a little bit more imminent. It's there on a week-to-week basis, as opposed to being like, oh, we'll see how that goes 3 years down the track. And of course, at an academy level, you know week to week what's going well and what's not, to a large extent anyway. But just having that added pressure put on those systems and on my own sort of decision making and coaching was what I was after in that move.
Yeah, and it's, it seems like it was a move that was almost necessary, from my perspective looking at it. But now looking back on that move over there, was it something? Was it what you expected? What were the first kind of moments like in New Zealand? And now reflecting back, was it what you expected it to be? Did you feel like you gained what you needed to gain over there?
Yeah. Sorry. Firstly, are you catching the dogs next door going off there? Sorry about that.
Oh mate, there's a dog next door, and I'm waiting for them to go off. There's a reason I said 9 till 10, because it's 10 to 11, probably been a bit of trouble. So it's fine, mate. We'll rock and roll.
Yeah, I guess that you sort of led me down the path and hit the nail on your head yourself a little bit there. Early days over there was definitely a challenge. Early days I was probably I just dug in and tried to set up the systems and processes that I'd used and tried to develop relationships with the players, the coaches, and that sort of stuff. And early days it's about you just head down doing the work that needs to be done. And so probably work-wise, it was pretty rosy over there. Took probably another 3 months till my partner got over there, until we really got set up. And I reckon I was bouncing around between Airbnbs and different staff places for the first month and a half too. So from the outside work perspective, it was a bit like doing Adelaide all over again. And
that's not necessarily easy. Like, sure, there's fun elements there, but the stresses of your partner not being there for 3 months. Obviously, you guys got a very close relationship. You having to bounce around and look where your next accommodation is going to be. That's not, that's fun, but the novelty can wear off. So is that something that you would look at and say, hey, look, young coaches, this is the realities of having to move to a different location for this job.
Definitely.
Typically,
if it comes up for you, just make sure you're being well taken care of. That's as simple as I can put it. And I was. That's not to say that. Yeah.
Sorry, mate, but yeah, you're talking about by the club, because like I was gonna say that not often do clubs do a good job, but sometimes they may not necessarily have the resources to be able to really make it as rosy as they possibly can. And that's not a knock on any club. That's just more the state of the industry. Like, you can't move to when you're going to a semi-professional environment. It's not going to be a red carpet treatment the way that maybe some other jobs in other industries are like. So yeah, like you said, it's not. You make sure you're being well taken care of. Is that a real consideration for you when you're speaking to these organisations and negotiating the first few months there?
Across the 3 moves that we've made, it's like that's been a really that's been one that I've learnt a little bit more about each time I've done it, in terms of just don't just jump at opportunities. Don't be scared to just put your foot down for a second and go, hold on, I'm moving across the country for this. Here are the things that are important, and just making sure that you're going to be supported as far as helping to find a place to rent, that sort of stuff. So, for example, the move over to Perth was probably the easiest one we've ever done. Like, they had a staff member who actually went and did rental inspections for us. So
amazing.
The places that we look at, we just say, okay, there's an inspection tomorrow at whatever time, and she'd go and have a look at the house. And for the most part, like we sort of were making decisions based off the photos that were online still, but you had to get a name written down to show that you'd gone to that inspection just to be able to apply. So stuff like that just made our life really easy. So yeah, little bits and pieces like that. Like, don't be scared to put your foot down on and ask for help where you need it.
And now you're back in Brisbane. You're working with the AFLW Lions team. And how's that transition moving back? I know not too long ago we spoke on the phone, and you just said that New Zealand's been really good, but personally it was more of a personal move to come back to Brisbane. So how are you finding the move back here? And you've only been in here about 6 months, right?
If that. I'm back in November. Yeah. So I think we ran into each other at the ACA conference, and I'd got back the day before that started. So,
wow.
Yeah. So I guess, it came down to the move from New Zealand came down to sort of like a bit of a personal sacrifice outweighing professional game in that scenario. For us, the Manawatu is a tiny little rural province in the central North Island. There's not a heap going on. So I guess like what I was gaining out of it professionally just wasn't outweighing the cost, definitely for my partner, and definitely to an extent for myself living there as well. So that one, brought us back here, and just lucky enough to sort of fall into a gig with the AFLW girls actually. The physical performance manager, Matt Green, he was actually heading over to New Zealand earlier this year for his brother's wedding, and we were supposed to be catching up over there. And when we made the call to come back, I just flicked him a message and said, mate, we'll be able to catch up earlier. I'll be in Brisbane. And then it just sort of rolled on from there. So super lucky in that regard to just to be able to continue doing what I love doing whilst living in my hometown. It's a very much it's a part-time role that's quite small in the scheme of things, but they're an awesome group, from players right through staff. There's not a person in that group that isn't easy to get along with. So I've lucked out big time there. That was a really fun program to be a part of until this current climate hit us with what's going on currently.
Yeah. No, the Lions group as a whole, just as an outside observer, that culture seems like it's gone through some changes in the last, and from an evidence point of view, really apparent in the last 3 or 4 years. I'm sure they've been building that for longer than that. It seems like a really good club for you to fall into. What I'm getting a sense of from you across this entire conversation and understanding your journey a lot more is there's almost 3 kind of elements to what I've kind of been able to unpack from you. And obviously you've got to love what you're doing to be able to relocate. Like you said, it's a really good measuring stick to go, yep, I need to move. But what I see you've done is you've also, and something that I haven't got from people that I've spoken to before, you've really taken your systems with you and you've used them as pillars and comfortability for you to be able to roll into a new environment with all this other outside stress going, I love my job, I'm going to stick to this job, but here are the processes, this is what I do, this is the systems that we have. And it's almost like a comfortability for you to be able to lay that down. And then, of course, the relationships you've seemingly been able to develop, and that's evident in being able to fall back into a job in Brisbane so quickly. What would be the biggest takeaway or lessons for you if you were to talk to a young coach? You mentioned someone you're speaking to who's just graduated, what was the message for that individual, and what would your broader message be to people that are watching that are new in the industry and thinking about maybe their first job, or they're about to do their first move interstate to another job? What are some of the words of advice that you would have for them?
Yeah, I guess so. Specifically, the conversation with him, and it's probably one I've had this a couple of times, so it's worth actually sharing. He was, finishing his undergrad. He's done a fair bit of work experience in that Rugby WA Academy system, and he was looking at going straight into a master's post his undergrad. And he was just asking me thoughts on that, thoughts on this course versus that course, so on and so forth. And I guess my underlying message to him was investigate them all, find out which one works for you, but ultimately just broaden your horizons as far as your actual experience as much as you can, because that'll better inform you around where you take your further education. He'd done a lot of work and he'd come a long way within that academy program, but the first thing I said to him was, mate, go find something weird, go find something that you don't know about. Obviously over in Perth, that whole waffle footy system is quite a good one to get involved with and seek experience in. I said to him, you need to go find something weird. Like go just find some sport that is a bit off the map that you can maybe get your hands a little bit more dirty in, but just see a whole different sort of scenario to what you're used to, and just broaden your horizons. So that was a conversation with him. I guess more broadly, it's tough. Similar to my own thoughts around taking different jobs and stuff, I go back and forth in my head because talking to young coaches is something I really enjoy doing, especially when they come with good questions. So I think the best piece of advice that I've sort of developed for myself that I would pass on is that your reflection and your appraisal of what you're doing should be uncomfortable, and you should be sort of thinking about what you've been doing, whether it's in your programming, your coaching, your interactions with coaches and staff, and you should be challenging yourself to a point where it feels a little bit uneasy. If you're sitting there going, no, I think I'm going really well, you're probably not asking the right questions, or you're not asking them, or you're just not looking deep enough. Sometimes you are. You're hitting the nail on the head and you're doing well. But I think a lot of the time, the questions you ask yourself in your head should feel uncomfortable.
I always do this. Like I had a clock here, but I always tend to go over time. But I really appreciate your time, mate. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. If you like this video, you can subscribe there. I just did an interview with Marnie Simpson, sports scientist at Queensland Firebirds. You might enjoy that video. That video is here. From James and Ben, thank you very much for joining us. Have a great day.